If you've ever worked a night shift, especially alone, you probably know that silence at night feels different from silence during the day. And that's something I didn't understand until I started working as a security guard in an old office building in the U.S., a 6-floor structure that had been mostly abandoned for years, except for first 2 floors, which were still occasionally used during business hours, while the rest of the building stayed dark, locked, and untouched. I had been working there for about 3 months, always on a night shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and at first the job felt easy. Too easy, actually, because nothing ever happened, and most nights were spent sitting in the control room drinking bad coffee, watching security cameras, and doing patrols every couple of hours just to follow protocol. The building had a strange reputation among guards, but I didn't take it seriously at the time, because every old building has stories, and I assumed this was just another case of people trying to make a boring job sound interesting. That night started like every other night, completely normal, with no warning signs or strange feelings, and I remember checking in at exactly 9:57 p.m., signing a logbook, and sitting down in front of the monitors as the day guard left without saying much, which wasn't unusual since no one liked staying there longer than they had to. By midnight, the building was dead quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear the faint hum of electricity in the walls, and around 1:30 a.m., I started feeling that uncomfortable sense that I was being watched, even though I was alone in a locked building surrounded by cameras, and I kept telling myself it was just my mind reacting to the isolation. At approximately 2:17 a.m., one of the monitors made a soft alert sound, indicating movement detection, and when I looked up, I saw it was camera number 4, which covered the basement hallway, a place that almost never showed activity because the basement was mainly storage and old maintenance rooms, all of which were locked. At first, I assumed it was a rat or maybe an insect triggering the sensor, something that happened occasionally. But when I focused on the screen, I noticed a dark figure standing in the middle of the hallway, perfectly centered in the camera's view, not walking or pacing like a person who wandered in by accident, but standing completely still, facing directly toward the camera as if it knew exactly where it was. I leaned closer to the monitor and adjusted the zoom, expecting the image to sharpen, but instead the figure's face remained strangely blurred. Not like low resolution, but more like the camera couldn't decide what it was looking at, and the longer I stared at it, the more uncomfortable I felt, because it didn't move even slightly, not even the way people naturally shift their weight when standing still. I grabbed my radio and tried to sound calm as I said, "Security to basement. Identify yourself," waiting for a response that never came, and after a few seconds of silence, I tried again, louder this time, but the radio only responded with static, which didn't make sense because the radio system worked fine throughout the building. As I watched the screen, the figure seemed to lean slightly closer to the camera, or at least that's what my brain told me, even though the image itself didn't visibly move. And then without warning, the entire camera feed glitched violently before cutting full static, as if the signal had been forcibly interrupted. I sat there staring at the screen, my heart beating faster than it should have, trying to rationalize what I'd just seen, telling myself it was probably a technical issue combined with exhaustion, but the feeling in my chest told me otherwise. According to procedure, any unexplained movement, alert required a physical patrol, and even though every instinct in my body told me not to go down the basement, I didn't want a guard who ignored protocol and got fired over something that could easily be explained, so I grabbed my flashlight, logged the incident, and stepped out of the control room, locking the door behind me as I headed toward the elevator. As I walked through the dark hallway, the overhead lights flickered occasionally, and with each step, the sense of being watched grew stronger, like something was aware of my movement and following me without making a sound, and several times I stopped and turned around quickly, shining my flashlight behind me, only to see empty hallways stretching into darkness. By the time I reached the basement level, my nerves were shot, and my hand was shaking slightly as I stepped off the elevator and walked into the hallway where camera number 4 was located, finding it exactly the way it always was, empty, silent, and undisturbed, with no signs that anyone had been there at all, which should have been reassuring, but somehow made everything feel worse. When I left the basement and returned to the elevator, I felt a strange sense of relief, like I had just proven to myself that nothing was wrong and that my mind had exaggerated what I saw on the cameras. But that feeling didn't last long, because the moment I stepped back in the control room and locked the door behind me, something felt off in a way I couldn't immediately explain. The room looked the same as always, with a row of monitors glowing softly in the dark, but the air felt heavier, almost stale, and there was a faint ringing in my ears that hadn't been there before. I sat down and scanned through the camera feeds, expecting to see nothing but empty hallways and locked doors, and that's when my eyes landed on camera number 1, the entrance camera, and my stomach dropped so suddenly it felt like I'd missed a step on a staircase. On the screen, standing directly in front of the main entrance, was me, wearing the same uniform, the same jacket, even standing with the same slight slouch I always had after hours of sitting. But the problem was that I was clearly sitting in the control room, watching the footage in real time. At first, I thought the camera might be showing a delayed recording, but the timestamp in the corner matched the current time exactly, and when I slowly raised my hand in the control room, the version of me on the screen didn't move at all. The figure just stood there, completely still, facing the camera with its head slightly tilted down, as if it was aware it was being watched. I felt a cold wave run through my body as I stood up and walked closer to the monitor, noticing that the face on the screen was partially obscured by shadow, even though the entrance lights were on. And the more I stared at it, the more I realized that its posture was wrong in a subtle way, like it was copying how I looked without fully understanding how a person is supposed to stand. I tried to laugh it off under my breath, telling myself this had to be some kind of visual glitch or feed overlap, but the sound of my own voice echoed strangely in the room, and that's when the figure on the screen slowly lifted its head and smiled directly at the camera. It wasn't a wide or exaggerated smile, just a small, deliberate one, but seeing my own face do that without my control made my chest tighten, and my hands go numb. Almost immediately after that, the lights in the control room flickered once, and then went out one by one, starting from the far corner and moving toward me, plunging sections of the room into darkness while the monitors remained on, casting an uneven glow across the walls. I reached for the desk phone to call for backup, but there was no dial tone, only static, and when I tried my cell phone, I realized there was no signal, even though I'd never had reception issues inside the building before. As panic started to set in, I noticed movement on another monitor, this time camera number 4 in the basement, and when I looked, the figure I had seen earlier was back, standing in the same spot as before, except now it was facing slightly to the side, as if it was looking at something just out of frame. I followed its gaze across the screen, and that's when I realized it was looking toward the camera angle that would have been pointing directly at control room, which made no sense given the layout of the building, and yet the timing felt too deliberate to be a coincidence. I backed away from the monitors, my heart racing, and that's when I heard a soft sound behind me, like someone shifting their weight on the other side of the door. Even though I knew I was alone on my shift, I stood there, barely breathing, listening as the sound repeated, slow and patient, followed by what I can only describe as the faint scrape of something being dragged across the floor outside. I told myself not to open the door, no matter what, and instead I grabbed my flashlight and my keys, planning to leave the building entirely if I had to, but when I turned back toward the monitors to check the cameras one last time, I froze, because camera number 1 no longer showed the entrance. It showed the hallway outside the control room, and standing right in front of the door was the same version of me from the entrance camera, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its smile still there, as it slowly raised its hand toward the door handle, while on the monitor's reflection, I could clearly see myself standing behind it, watching. I don't know how long I stood there staring at the monitor, watching that version of me grip the control room door handle without opening it, because time felt warped in a way that's hard to explain. Like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and every instinct told me to stay perfectly still, as if any movement might trigger whatever was on the other side of that door. The hand on the screen tightened around the handle, and I expected the door to start rattling, but instead it slowly let go, and the figure straightened up, tilting its head back into a normal position before stepping backward, out of the camera's view. I waited, listening for footsteps in the hallway, but the silence returned, heavier than before, pressing in on me until it felt hard to breathe. That should have been my chance to run, to leave the building and never look back, but fear has a way of freezing logic, and instead of bolting for the exit, I walked back toward the monitors, needing to understand what was happening, or at least convince myself I wasn't losing my mind. That's when my phone vibrated in my hand, nearly making me drop it, and when I looked down, I saw a text message from an unknown number that read, "You shouldn't have looked. followed a few seconds later by another message that said, "Now it knows where you are." I tried calling the number immediately, but the call failed before it could even start, and when I looked back up at the monitors, every single camera feed had changed at once, no longer showing empty hallways or stairwells, but angles of the building that didn't exist, corridors that stretched too far, rooms that were slightly wrong, with doors placed where walls should have been and lights that flickered in patterns that made my head hurt if I stared too long. In the middle of each feed, standing at different distances from the cameras, was the same figure wearing my uniform, sometimes facing the lens, sometimes turned away, but always unmistakably me. Panic finally broke through whatever paralysis I'd been stuck in, and I grabbed my keys and flashlight and ran out of the control room, not caring anymore about protocol or explanations, just wanting to get out before whatever was happening escalated further. The hallway lights flickered as I ran, and I could hear something moving behind me. Not footsteps exactly, but the sound of fabric brushing against walls, like someone running without fully lifting their feet. I didn't look back. I reached the stairwell and took the steps 2 at a time, aiming for the ground floor exit. But when I burst through the door, I realized I was in the basement again, standing in the same hallway where this all started. Even though I knew for a fact I had been going up, the air down there felt colder now, and the hum of the lights was louder, almost distorted. And at the far end of the hallway, I saw a silhouette standing beneath camera number 4. I shouted, demanding to know who it was, but the figure didn't respond. And as I moved closer, I realized with growing dread that it wasn't walking toward me. It was standing still while the hallway itself seemed to stretch and compress, pulling me closer, whether I wanted to move or not. When I was only a few feet away, the figure stepped into the light, and I saw my own face staring back at me, expressionless this time, its eyes slightly unfocused, like it was looking to me rather than at me. It opened its mouth, and in my own voice it said, "Your shift is almost over," and then everything went dark at once. I don't remember collapsing or hitting the floor, but the next thing I knew, I was outside, lying on the pavement near the building's entrance as dawn broke, my uniform soaked with sweat, and my phone clutched in my hand, cracked but still on. Paramedics told me a passerby had found me and called for help, and when I tried to explain what happened, the words sounded wrong even to my own ears, like a story I didn't quite believe anymore. The company reviewed the security footage, but according to them, nothing unusual had occurred that night. No movement alerts, no glitches, no strange figures. Just me leaving control room shortly before my shift ended and never coming back. I quit the job immediately and moved out of the state a few weeks later, trying to put as much distance as possible between myself and that building. But no matter where I go, the feeling hasn't completely left me. Sometimes late at night, when my phone screen reflects my face in the dark, I notice my reflection doesn't move exactly when I do, and once, just once, I swear I saw it smile on its own before the screen went black, and ever since then, I've been terrified that whatever took my place that night didn't stay in that building, and that one day, when I least expect it, my shift will start again.